In this tutorial, we'll delve into the fascinating realm of blur effects, exploring not just one but two distinct methods to elevate your visual storytelling. Later, discover 5 compelling scenarios where incorporating blur can transform your videos into captivating masterpieces. Okay, let's get started. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take this video of people walking down a road or a sidewalk to or from an event, and we're going to drag it down to our timeline, and we can see the people. We play the video and we see people walking down the sidewalk. Okay, we're going to move our playhead back to the first. Now there's 2 ways that you can blur in Camtasia 2023. And we're going to cover the first one. And how you start off with the first one is you go to annotations here on the left, click on that, and it brings up this menu. And I had already clicked on previously the drop up above. See this little drop or teardrop? And this menu comes up. So we have the teardrop, we have an emphasis or spotlight, highlight, and we have a last one which pixelates. So we're going to pick the teardrop, and you're going to see a little star here that allows you to put it into your favorites up here. But we're going to click on that, and we're going to drag that down to track number 2. Okay, now the minute we drop it in, we see that we have a rectangle over here, and it's right on a person who's holding the baby. What we're going to do is we're going to shrink it up so we only get him, pretty much. So we don't want to get it too small because will be later you'll see it's a little harder to track if it's too tight. If you move over to the right, you'll see our properties panel, and you see that we have annotations, blur, and we have a menu that says intensity. And we can lower that or increase that, and so we can actually get rid of our blur, and we can bring our blur back up. We want it about, let's go about 60% range, and we see that he's blurred. People can't really identify him that well. And this is how you do the first blur. Now we're going to come back to this blur later, because even though the other blur, the second one I'm going to show you, has a lot more advantages, it has a disadvantage where this blur has the advantage, and so we're going to come back and show you that later. Okay, on our second blur, we're going to come over here on the left, and we're not going to use annotations. We're going to go down and we're going to use visual effects, which is right here. It could be in a different location on your screen, and if you don't find it, it might be hidden down below. And we have visual effects, and we move over to the right, and we see we have the blur region. We click on this. Now, unlike the first version I showed you, the first blur, where you drop it down on top of the timeline, this is an effect, and therefore you're going to drag it down into your timeline. And you see the timeline turns green. We release it, and you can see effect has been added. You see the little triangle or the little arrow head on the bottom, that toggles on the effect right there. It's toggled on, and it'll toggle it off so that you don't see it. So now we have the effects within the timeline. We go up, we see our blur square is much bigger, and you'll see X in the middle. By the way, when you move this around, you want to make sure you grab it right in the middle. Otherwise, what's going to happen is you're going to move your whole screen, and you don't want to do that. So we're back here at the beginning of our playhead again, is at the very first. And we see in the back here, we can see our child a little bit. And the man that's holding him, and that's the man we want to blur. We're going to come down and we're going to shrink down there. We're going to come up from the bottom. And we're going to come to the right. And we, like I say, we want to keep enough space where it's easier to track this. And by tracking, you'll see what I mean. when we start moving this around. Now, over on the right, you'll see blurred region on the properties panel. And once again, we can blur it more and we can blur it less. This blur has more of a range than the other one. You can see when it blurs all the way, it totally blurs him out. But we're just going to come down here and leave him in there a little bit, so we got a face, but we can't see who it is. The other thing we have over here, we have the tint. We can actually change the tint to a different color. For example, we can change this to, let's say for example, red. Or we'll go back and change it back to our white. Okay, we can also see we have the opacity. Opacity allows us to affect the color, not the blur itself, but the color of the blur. And then we have over here, we have additional things we didn't have on the other one. The other one, all we had was the blur range. Over here we have all these tools. And one of them we have is we have a oval. And so we can click that and we have the oval. Now, one thing to keep in mind, we have a little invert here. This invert tool is actually really handy. And one way is in picking your blur, you can select this, and now we see only him in the blur. So now we get a better idea how our blur is, and we can see that maybe we're a little too close to the side of his head, and right here, and I'm gonna come down a little bit to on the bottom and on the right. We don't want to blur out the child. And so now we can see by inverting that we have a little bit more control. The other thing is, if you want to focus on something, you can hit the invert, and this allows you to focus on the area. On the other drop, if you notice, there was this feature was actually up here under as a separate item, and we'll show you that a little bit later when we come back to that teardrop. The other thing we have is we can feather. Feather's good because we can make it to where it's not so tight. We can also ease in and ease out, and I'm sure you know what that means. So now it looks like we're done, but we're not, because one of the problems is this is a video. It's moving. There's a crowd moving down the aisle. How do we track him? And so if we watch right here, we see it only takes a second. He's out of the blur. And now we can see what his face looks like. We don't want that. So how do we correct that situation? Okay, let's move our head. Make sure your head's back to the start again where he's in the blur. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna go up to animations. And we're gonna go at the top over to, not zoom and pan, but over to animations. And we're going to select custom animation. And since this is effect, once again, we're going to bring this down into our track, track 1. And we want this to cover the whole range of the video, so we're going to expand this to the end, at least to there. And we're going to grab the back one and we're going to move it all the way to the front. And now what we're going to do is we're going to do the play. And I use my keyboard for that. And as soon as he gets out of the range of this, we want to move this down to where he's at. Once again, grab in the middle right on top of that X. Now you see it has picked it up and moved it in. And we're going to play again. He moves out of it right about there. Going to once again move it down to cover his face. And we're going to play again. And he moves out of it. Down, cover his face. He's going to move down again. And you can clean this up and make it look better, but it gives you the idea of what you have to do in order to track a moving object like a person in this crowd, and you want to blur out their face so they're not recognized. And it looks like we just got a couple more. Now you notice it's getting a little bigger here within inside of our box. So that's one reason we made our box bigger, is to correct for that. And we want to move this once again. This will be probably the last time. Okay. Okay, let's see what it looks like. Whoop. Now he came back out. So we got to pick it up again. And put him back in. And there he goes. So you got the idea of how this works. Okay, so we go back to the front first. We can see it's tracking him down. It's doing a pretty good job. Like I say, you can clean this up and make it even better, but you can't identify him too well. There's one spot where it seems to come out of it a little bit. Let's see where that was. Anyway, it's close enough. That's how you use the blur in Camtasia 2023. The other blur I showed you is available in Camtasia 2022, but the new one is available only in Camtasia 2023. Now you might be saying, well, that's good. We're blurring one person in this crowd, but there's another person who we maybe want to blur as well. How do we do that? Well, if you try this method I just showed you on the new blur, you cannot, as far as I know, you can let me know if I'm wrong, but you cannot add a second blur to this timeline using the new method. So if we wanted to blur out this guy back here who looks like a spy, and we want to blur him, how do we do it? Well, this is where we go back to the first blur. And that first blur was under annotations, and it was right here on the blur. By the way, this blur this spotlight is nothing more than the invert button on the second blur. So anyway, let's go up here. And the reason we can add this is because this does not go into your timeline. Remember, it goes on top. So we can sit and drag the blur down here. We've moved our playhead over here all the way to the left. And now we have our box. We're going to take our box, click in the middle on that X, move it over, and we got our spy. The guy with the glasses, we have him. And we're going to put this over here. And bring it down. And now we have our second blur. Here's our first blur, here's our second blur. And now you do the same thing that we did on the other blur. We go up to animation, click on that, pick out our custom animation, drag it down into the box, same as we did on the other one. Now this box we can expand so it lasts as long as the other video clip, and we will expand our animation to fit the whole size of the box. We make sure our playhead is all the way back. We have our blur right over our man. We go ahead and we play. He's out of the blur thing. We move it over. And move it again. You get the idea. of how this works. It's actually pretty simple to get this. Fortunately, he's moving to the side, which makes it a little bit easier. So let's go back. And now we see we have blurred one man, blurred their second man. And as he comes over and gets out of the picture, we don't need this last animation part right here, so we can click on that and we can delete it. And we could probably go ahead and shorten up this clip since he's out of the picture. Okay, now we can blur dozens of people by using this other method where we have the little teardrop. We just keep adding them and stacking them on top of each other. So this is a video on how to use blur in Camtasia 2023, but don't leave yet, because I'm now going to show you different places where you can use blurs that maybe you haven't thought of. Here are 5 scenarios where using the blur effect can be particularly effective. Number 1, canceling an identity. Blur can be employed to hide or protect the identity of individuals, an address, or sensitive information. Number 2, focusing attention. Use blur to highlight a specific subject or area in the frame. Number 3, showing depth of field, such as a faraway mountain range. Number 4, introducing a scene. Use a blur effect at the beginning of a video to introduce a scene gradually to build anticipation. Number 5, flashback or dream sequences. Apply a subtle blur effect to distinguish the flashback or dream sequence from the main storyline, giving them a distinct visual identity. Here I use the transition blur zoom effect in Camtasia. Congratulations on completing this Camtasia tutorial. This was just a glimpse into the incredible capabilities this software has to offer for elevating your video projects. Having been a devoted user of Camtasia for years, I attest to its power and versatility. If you're ready to take your video editing to the next level, I highly recommend trying out Camtasia. Click on my affiliate link below. Your support helps me create more valuable content for you. Thank you for joining me on this tutorial.